Nobody warns you about this. You start reading the books. You discover meditation. You learn about manifestation, about the subconscious mind, about ancient wisdom that's been hidden for centuries. And for a while, it's incredible. You feel like you've been given the cheat codes to reality. Colors look brighter. Synchronicities appear everywhere. You feel connected to something vast and intelligent. And then, without any warning, everything falls apart. Not slowly, not gently. It feels like the ground beneath your entire identity opens up and swallows you whole. The practices that used to light you up now feel hollow. The confidence you built dissolves into confusion. The people around you, the ones who used to understand you, suddenly feel like strangers. And the worst part is, you can't explain it to anyone. Because from the outside, nothing has changed. But inside, you are being dismantled. This is the part of spiritual awakening that no guru, no YouTube channel, no best-selling book wants to talk about. Because it doesn't sell, it doesn't inspire, it terrifies. But if you are on this path, you need to hear this. Because what's happening to you is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough. And in the next 18 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why. Let's start by breaking the fantasy. The modern spiritual community has turned awakening into an aesthetic. Crystals on nightstands, meditation retreats in Bali, soft focus Instagram posts about raising your vibration. And there's nothing wrong with any of that until you believe that spiritual growth is supposed to feel good all the time. It's not. Every genuine mystical tradition in human history has described awakening as a process that includes profound suffering. The Sufi poets called it the annihilation of the self. The Christian mystics called it the purgation of the soul. The Buddhist tradition calls it dukkha, the suffering that comes from the dissolution of attachment. The Hindu path of Kundalini awakening describes a literal fire that burns through every illusion, every false identity, every comfortable lie you've ever told yourself. These aren't metaphors. They are descriptions of a psychological process that modern neuroscience is only now beginning to understand. Dr. Willoughby Britton, a neuroscientist at Brown University, spent over a decade studying what she calls the difficult stages of meditation. Her research found that a significant percentage of dedicated meditators experience episodes of anxiety, depersonalization, emotional instability, and existential terror. Not because they were doing it wrong, but because they were doing it right. Awakening is not the addition of something new. It is the removal of everything false. And that removal does not feel like enlightenment. It feels like dying. The term dark night of the soul comes from a poem written by a 16th century Spanish mystic named St. John of the Cross. He was a Carmelite monk who spent 9 months imprisoned in a tiny cell, beaten regularly, nearly starved. During that time, he experienced a complete spiritual desolation. Every sense of God's presence vanished. Every prayer felt like it was hitting a ceiling. The consolations he had built his entire life around disappeared. And when he emerged, he didn't describe that darkness as punishment. He described it as purification. The dark night, he wrote, was the process by which the soul is stripped of its attachments, not to worldly things, but to spiritual comfort itself. The soul must learn to walk in total darkness with no feeling, no confirmation, no reward, and keep going anyway. This is the stage that millions of modern seekers are now encountering without any context. They discover meditation. They experience initial breakthroughs, moments of clarity, peace, connection. And then the breakthroughs stop. Not only do they stop, but a kind of darkness sets in that feels worse than before they started. The dark night of the soul stages follow a recognizable pattern. First comes the withdrawal of spiritual experiences. The meditation that used to bring bliss now brings nothing. Then comes doubt, deep, crippling doubt about everything you believed. Then comes emotional turbulence, grief without cause, anger without target, a sadness that seems to come from somewhere ancient and unnamed. And then comes the void, the feeling of total emptiness, not peace, not calm, emptiness, like standing in the center of your own life and recognizing nothing. If you are in this stage right now, listen carefully. You are not broken. You are not going backward. You are in the most critical phase of transformation. The dark night is not the absence of growth. It is growth happening at a depth your conscious mind cannot track. To understand why awakening hurts, you need to understand what's actually dying. The ego is not a bad thing. It's a structure, a psychological construct your mind built over decades to navigate the world. It's your name, your story, your preferences, your beliefs about who you are. I am successful. I am a good person. I am spiritual. I am strong. These are all ego structures. And spiritual awakening systematically dismantles them. This is what the ego death experience actually is. Not a psychedelic trip, not a meditation breakthrough. It's a slow, grinding dissolution of every identity you've ever held. And it happens because awakening reveals something terrifying, that every single one of those identities was a construction, a story you told yourself so many times that you forgot it was fiction. When the spiritual identity itself begins to dissolve, I am awakened, I am on the path, I understand how the universe works, that's when the real crisis begins. Because now you've lost not just your old identity, but also the new one you replaced it with. The philosopher and mythologist Joseph Campbell described this as the threshold crossing, the point in the hero's journey where the old world is gone and the new world hasn't formed yet. You are suspended between two realities belonging to neither. Campbell called it the belly of the whale. The alchemists called it nigredo, the blackening. In our video on the 7 Hermetic Laws, we discussed the principle of rhythm, that every expansion is followed by contraction. The ego death experience is the deepest contraction on the spiritual path. The temptation at this stage is to retreat, to go back to the old identity, the old life, the old certainties. Many people do, and there's no shame in that. But if you can hold the tension, if you can sit in the not knowing, something extraordinary begins to happen on the other side. What nobody tells you is that spiritual awakening isn't just psychological. It shows up in the body. Sleep disruption is one of the most common spiritual awakening symptoms. People report weeks of insomnia, vivid nightmares, or the opposite, sleeping 12 hours and waking up exhausted. The nervous system is recalibrating. If you watched our video on the theta state, you know how deeply connected sleep architecture is to mental programming. When that programming is being rewritten, sleep is the first system to destabilize. Energy fluctuations are another hallmark. Periods of intense, almost manic energy, followed by crashes of complete fatigue. Some people describe a literal vibrating or buzzing sensation in the body, particularly along the spine, what the Hindu tradition calls kundalini energy, moving through the chakras. Emotional flooding is perhaps the most difficult. Tears for no reason. Rage at nothing. A grief so deep it feels ancestral, like you're mourning not just your own losses, but something much larger. These aren't random. They're the stored emotions of a lifetime. And sometimes, if you believe the traditions, lifetimes finally being processed and released because the ego structure that was holding them in place has dissolved. Cognitive changes are common too. Difficulty concentrating. A feeling of unreality, as if the world has become a stage set and you can suddenly see behind the backdrop. Psychologists call this depersonalization or derealization. In spiritual contexts, it's understood as the mind adjusting to a new way of perceiving. Here's the critical distinction. If these symptoms are accompanied by a sense, however faint, that something meaningful is happening, that you are being transformed rather than destroyed, that's the spiritual process at work. If the symptoms are accompanied by hopelessness, thoughts of self-harm, or total inability to function, that's a signal that professional support is needed. There is no contradiction between spiritual growth and asking for help. The bravest thing any seeker can do is admit when they need a guide. One of the most painful aspects of awakening is what it does to your relationships. As your perception shifts, the conversations that used to satisfy you feel empty. The activities that used to bond you with friends feel hollow. You find yourself unable to participate in small talk, in gossip, in the collective complaints that keep most social groups together. Not because you think you're better, but because something inside you has genuinely changed and the old frequencies no longer resonate. People notice. They feel the distance even if they can't name it. Some will pull away, some will push back. You've changed. You used to be fun. What happened to you? And the answer you can't give them is, the person they knew is dying. This is where spiritual depression often sets in. The isolation isn't chosen. It's imposed by the gap between your inner experience and the world's ability to understand it. You're in a room full of people and you've never felt more alone. In our video on Marcus Aurelius, we discussed the Stoic concept of the inner citadel, the idea that true strength is found in solitude, in the relationship with your own mind. During the dark phase of awakening, this concept becomes not philosophy, but survival. You are being taught, against your will, to find ground within yourself because every external ground has been removed. The relationships that survive this process become unshakable. The ones that don't were built on a version of you that no longer exists. This is painful to accept, but it is also true. So how does this end? Does it end? Yes, but not the way you expect. The dark night doesn't end with a sudden flash of enlightenment. It ends with a quiet morning where you wake up and realize that the weight is gone. Not because the questions were answered, but because you stopped needing the answers. Not because you found a new identity, but because you discovered you don't need one. Integration is the stage that follows dissolution. And it looks nothing like the spiritual fantasies you started with. There are no fireworks, no angelic choirs. Integration looks like doing the dishes with full presence. Walking to work and feeling the air on your skin as if for the first time. Having a conversation and actually hearing the other person instead of performing your role. But integration doesn't happen automatically. It requires grounding practices. Reconnecting with the body through movement, through nature, through simple physical activities. The spiritual journey can become dangerously unmoored if it stays entirely in the mind. The purpose of awakening is not to escape the physical world, it's to inhabit it more fully. Community matters enormously at this stage. Finding even one person who understands what you've been through makes a profound difference. Not a guru, not a teacher, an equal. Someone who has walked through their own dark night and can say, without philosophy, without platitudes, I know, I've been there, you're going to be okay. Professional support, therapy, counseling, even psychiatric evaluation is not a failure of spiritual practice. It is an extension of it. The most integrated traditions in history, Tibetan Buddhism, Sufi Islam, the Desert Fathers of Christianity, they all had structures of mentorship and support built into the path. The modern seeker often walks alone. That is not strength, that is a gap in the system. And finally, patience. The integration period can take months, sometimes years. There is no shortcut. The ego structure that took decades to build doesn't get replaced overnight. But what emerges on the other side is something the old ego could never have imagined. An identity based not on stories, but on direct experience. Not on beliefs, but on knowing. There's a reason every wisdom tradition describes this process. It's not because they wanted to scare people. It's because spiritual transformation requires the death of what you were in order to birth what you're becoming. The caterpillar doesn't add wings to its existing body. It dissolves completely inside the chrysalis. Every cell breaks down into a formless biological soup. And from that soup, something entirely new organizes itself. The butterfly doesn't remember being a caterpillar. It doesn't need to. It is something else now. This is what the alchemists meant by the great work. What the Hermetic tradition describes as the transmutation of lead into gold. The lead is not removed and replaced. The lead itself becomes gold. If you watched our video on the 7 Hermetic laws, you know the principle of polarity, that opposites are identical in nature, only different in degree. Suffering and awakening are not opposites. They are the same process, experienced at different stages. The darkness was never the enemy. It was the furnace. And you were never being destroyed. You were being forged. If you are in the middle of this process right now, if everything feels like it's falling apart and you can't see the other side, here is what I need you to understand. What's happening to you has happened to every genuine seeker in history, every mystic, every sage, every teacher whose words you've been studying. They all walked through this fire, not around it, through it. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are in the belly of the whale, and the only way out is through. Take care of your body. Find your community. Ask for help when you need it. And hold on. Because the person waiting for you on the other side of this darkness is someone your current self cannot even imagine. This is video 10, the final chapter in our first series. If you found this video first, go back to the beginning. Start with video 1. The full series builds on itself, each piece unlocking the next. This wasn't a collection of random topics, it was a map, and you've just seen the territory that the map doesn't show. Subscribe, and I'll see you in what comes next.